Welcome to Origin Stories. I'm RD.
I'm Parrot.
We're telling stories behind the digital art revolution
Each week we interview top artists.
and live stream with the community.
Let's go. Today is tomorrow's origin story.
Laith Safa, welcome to Origin Stories.
Hello, Roger. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
I am great. And I mentioned to you before we hit record that it's been a minute since Origin Stories were recorded, but just so everybody out there is aware of the history of Origin Stories, for a large chunk of them, really large chunk of them, you have been involved in the process, in the pipeline. So to come full circle and to do this interview, it's a really special one, man.
That's true. We've been around for a while now. I remember when I first started working and helping with you, helping with Origin Stories. It was a fun time, and now we're here.
And now we're here. And now it's about you. And so let's step in and let's do it the right way. Posing the question, Laith, what is your origin story?
I'm a 3D artist, but I'm also just a guy who likes to make a lot of designs. I've been doing it for like a decade now. I went to school for it and all that good stuff. But for the past 5 years, I've just been focusing on like 3D work and art direction. And maybe 2 years ago, I started doing the NFTs and joined the NFT space because of Carlos Marcial. He actually was a director that I worked for in Toronto. So he onboarded me, and it's been history.
And let's double down on Carlos, because Carlos is actually not the first contact. Like the first time I ever heard the name Laith Safa, right, is we had connected ourselves just through a possible opening. But the second time I heard the name Laith Safa was through Carlos, and putting those two dots together was a pretty fun moment. And credit to Carlos for like really pushing Laith onto a lot of radars that are really fun to reflect on.
No, absolutely. I don't think I would have the same amount of reach that I had or success in the NFT space without Carlos. He definitely, used his reach, used his account. And then when he went on Origin Stories, I actually didn't know that he said that. And he mentioned my name. I was like, oh, he didn't have to do that. What a nice guy. But yeah, all power to Carlos.
Yes, let's go, Carlos.
Exactly. It's the Carlos hour today.
So before we get to your time in the NFT space, talk a little bit about how your 3D, I guess, style, for lack of a better word, your 3D style came together, because something that I've always found striking about your approach is your lighting, right? When I think of Laith, I just think magical lighting in both the artworks that you have out there that are minted from your end, but also having a bit of that insider knowledge about a lot of the social assets that you put together from time to time. The magic of Laith lighting. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, honestly, I think I started focusing more on lighting rather than like rather bigger technical like stuff in 3D, like modeling and shading. Like I think I reached a good point where I was able to convey a lot of shapes well that I had imagined. But then I felt like the next step in my artwork was creating like a dramatic lighting, and then that kind of started to break down my process as well, because now, rather than just starting with the models and going straight ahead of it, definitely start with the block out and then getting the lighting first. Because I feel like if the atmosphere is not there with the basic shapes, you kind of don't have a good result. Usually it's very hard to kind of fine tune that in the end when you have all this detail being thrown at you. Like I said, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, in my 3rd or 4th year university, we had a lighting course, and then it was just purely on cinema and had nothing to do with 3D really. And I think that really opened my eyes, especially back in the day, like in the 50s and the 60s. A lot of the unnatural light was used, especially with the subjects, like in the silver cinema space. But it was mainly done for artistic reasons. And it kind of helped me break away from that notion that everything in 3D has to be kind of based on reality. And I think a lot of artists now, they're used to doing lighting in like 3-point lighting or just very traditional way instead of like being very creative with it. And then, ever since that, and then art history courses, kind of like seeing all the old like masters, like from the Renaissance and the Baroque, a lot of it had very romantic lighting setups. And I thought, you know what, that would be cool in a 3D setting. So I kind of started to shift more towards that focus. But yeah.
So carrying that forward and just carrying your approach forward, what did you see about NFTs that encouraged you to dive in?
Well, I think before I even started getting actual good client work and good projects, I did a lot of music, like album covers and stuff. That was the way to get money when I was in university and pay my bills per se. And also, I just hated that because it was like a lot of time you weren't really respected with your opinion. You were kind of more of just like an end product in a sense. And I think the cool thing about NFT is it kind of allowed me that creative freedom to create stuff and then also have the opportunity to get paid from it. And I think that was kind of like a very freeing aspect. Because I think once you have that like financial wall starting to break down, you're more able to kind of just be you. I think anyone you ask who worked in the music industry who's done album covers will tell you the same thing, that it can be quite bullshit, if you don't mind my French.
The music industry is fraught with stories. That's what
Yeah.
that's what I found over the
Yeah.
course of a large amount of relationships and a lot of conversations with artists. I have found that the music industry is fraught with stories of frustration. Let's just put it nicely.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. I think it's, when you get two big industries colliding together, this kind of an issue. Like the music industry has a lot of funding per se, if that's one way to put it. So they would think they're ahead of you, and then the artists obviously have their egos, and you don't want to get pushed around, obviously. So there's always going to be that friction, but it doesn't mean you can't have like a great relationship in the end. But it definitely was my biggest friction career part so far. And I think NFTs kind of helped me just stray away from that for a bit. And I think in the future it'd be interesting moving forward with even artists like BT and stuff involving with a lot of heavy music production with NFTs. So I think that's gonna be a very cool aspect in the future.
So actually, before we plow directly in NFTs, just to stay on the music industry for one sec, flipping it around and looking at it from the positive lens, what's one way in which doing album covers and working within the music industry for a bit helped your artwork along?
I think in a way it helped me with, I guess, people. I think that's probably the most important aspect. Like coming from university was a very heavily like do your work, do your technical sides, and then do your exams and get through it. But I think working with artists and musicians, you definitely have to understand how to navigate these relationships. And then with that, even though like it was a lot of friction, once you talk to these artists, there's a lot of ideas that people who might be artists might not think about just because you're so immersed in it. So when I was talking to people who might not be visual artists, you get a lot of not necessarily like childish ideas in the sense they're bad, but childish in the sense that they're very free. And I think that was very refreshing on that aspect. So I think that once I worked more projects for album covers, I was able to just be a bit more, I guess, abstract in my work.
Oh, that's really interesting. So in that way, it becomes a fabulous precursor for NFTs as well.
Yeah, it kind of prepares you for that, like, have fun with it, but also, like understand who your target audience per se, right? Because while NFTs are art, you are also kind of creating something for a purpose, right?
So then you come into the freewheeling Wild West of the NFT space, right? With a ton of pros and of course some cons as well. And then when you bust open those doors, how do you choose your first minted artwork? It's one of my favorite questions to ask. It's a point of fascination, and I think there's such a wide range of answers. All right, it doesn't. What's right, what's wrong, but sometimes it's don't know, just had to pick one, and then sometimes it's this long journey, extremely detailed and thought out. Where did you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, so for me, it was I used a piece that I actually always update maybe every year, whether it's just for my personal updates or like actually posting it online. And it was the only mask that I had from my Cursed Masks collection. And that was actually one of my main pieces that kind of got me, not popular, but got me some sort of traction on socials maybe a couple of years ago. And then I was like, you know what, like that's usually my benchmark for my talents and skill. Every year I try to improve it, even if a little way. So I thought, it was fitting to enter a new space with that. And then, yeah, within like, I think like 2 days after minting it, it actually did, got a bid and sold to a collector called Flash. And that was kind of the start of the journey.
The start of the journey. So that piece is Ani. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Oni on Foundation. That's where it was minted.
Yeah, and big shout out to Flash Rec, great collector in the space. So
yeah.
What a start from there. And then I see from there it goes right into the hands of, mention him for another time, Carlos.
Absolutely. Yeah, he this was actually a piece that I used in my portfolio when I applied to the studio. Carlos was a director at. And he always liked it. So when it was minted, he had to jump on the opportunity.
Oh, how perfect is that?
I know. Yeah. He's been there from the start.
That's amazing. And a huge supporter, of fellow artists. And so that then comes our intersection. And I will say this, I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but it really hits me that the artwork that I associated with you, Laith, at the beginning, and then still do now to this day, because it's hard, you take that first impression, it's hard to take that out of your mind. Yeah. But Jet's portrait to me on Foundation really sticks out as like the Laith artwork. I think at that time it may have been your avatar. And yeah, so can you talk about that one?
Yeah, so Jet's portrait was actually probably my most detailed like collection. It has a bunch of pieces in it. So some of them are a bit more abstract, like Treasure. Treasure is also part of that universe, but it takes a bit more of a kind of like psychedelic, funky looking aspect. For me, that entire collection was actually pushing kind of like my technical skills forward. As you can see, it's a bit more grounded, not really grounded, but the subject is more human. He doesn't have a funky mask on. So that for me, that was the main part, is like, okay, how can I create an art collection that can also force me to learn more technical aspects? And then that's also when you start seeing my lighting take a bit more like dimension, where I was being a bit more creative and like free with it per se. And then essentially the collection is about a person who loses his memory and then stumbles upon like a random planet, and then he has to gather clues about who he is and figure out who he is. And that's that's Jet. And then from there he goes on his adventure and discovers his ancestry and all the fun stuff, and rekindles the power of knowing where you come from and all that. And that's Jet.
I love this concept of Jet, and that first piece in the series, again, it's the lighting, it's the color, it's the texture. So on the texture front, talk a little bit, is there a meaning to any component of his jacket? Because I noticed two specific textures stand out. It's the eye on the top of the sleeve, as well as the pattern on the top left breast. But what if any meaning is there?
So the eye is actually just like the I guess some cultures call it the all-seeing eye, or like the eye that blocks away curses and stuff. In my culture, it's just, some people have it as like a necklace or a medallion on the dashboard, and it kind of just blocks like bad omens and bad vibes essentially. And then on his chest it says unit number 96 with a compass, and that's just my birth year. And the compass is just to kind of like, it's a very cliche symbol of just keep going forward.
I appreciate its subtlety. The very the very non-technical term, but I remember when I was sort of figuring my own process out and what I liked, right, when it came to art, which to the general credit of NFTs, it really forced me to come face to face with that. But the very non-technical term of zoomability, I really enjoy these types of artworks that are so striking in the profile of this character. And again, going back, lighting, color, but then you start to see some of those textures, and it just makes me want to go deeper and deeper and ask those kinds of questions. Yeah, you know me, I like story, right? So it's trying to get out of you as much of the why as possible.
Yeah, I definitely wanted, like, that's why the details are so small. Is in the age of like social media, I think everyone spends maybe a good 2 seconds looking at your post before scrolling. And the idea with this is like, okay, if I had it to be printed on a large print per se, people are going to spend more time in person. So if adding more details and just, like I said, storytelling elements to build out this universe that Jet is in, I think that was kind of a good choice by me, because it, like I said, it added a bit more dimension to the storytelling and to who Jet is. And then if you want to dive deeper into the piece, you can actually look around it, zoom in, and see all these details. Because like before Jet, I definitely had a more, not necessarily one-dimensional piece where it's like, okay, you have a subject and that's it. But it was definitely not as thought out or planned per se.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I greatly enjoy that future leaning thought process of, if this is displayed differently. Really appreciate that. Like, if this is displayed differently, what will matter, and that you've laid in these types of zoomable Easter eggs that will exist, that can exist and be seen on lots of larger screens. That that really comes through. Take that a step further on your next, so Gilgamesh and then Treasure. Speaking of zoomability, you have the tablet. Can you talk about that tablet in hand that then becomes bigger in the piece Treasure?
Yeah, so the tablet is actually like one of the first, I guess, written novels, if I'm not mistaken, or stories, called Gilgamesh, which is this like god hero person from Babylon. And I think for me, like, main point of Gilgamesh, the piece that I made, was kind of rekindling like your love for your history and who you came from. I think when you immigrate to like a more Western country and you come from the East, there's definitely a bit more stigma around it, especially when you grow up here, you don't really learn a lot about where you are or who you come from. I mean, rightfully so. Like, it's not really the history of Canada per se, right? So they don't have to teach it. So I think I really didn't start paying attention to my own history until maybe like 3 years ago, where I started to really dive deep and ask my siblings for any sort of like books they had, like historical books and stuff. And then in my process, I learned that people of that region contributed a lot to the world, and it's a lot of stuff you never really hear about. So I think there was power in that. That's why there's this kind of heavenly aura about the piece that I had, with kind of the light shining through from the sky and stuff. Is that it's the knowledge that's kind of flowing through the tablet, which I guess is a symbol for all the books and resources that we have access to now. And then once you go a step further and zoom in to the treasure piece, it's focused on that kind of like, I don't know how to say it. It's treasure, right? Information is so important nowadays. And then there's power of knowing who your ancestors were, in a sense, because it definitely, I don't know how to say it. It kind of pushes you to be better than who you were yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was it. I got the yellow light coming out of the stone. It kind of just reflects knowledge again, the color choice, and then that's when I decided, okay, maybe for the hand I go for a more abstract look rather than the human skin that I usually would have for Jet's collection. But for me, that was more about kind of the knowledge and power flowing into the subject, which is myself.
And then take that a step further to complete the Jet series on Foundation, but Bad Days. Is this? I've never had a chance to ask you about this piece before, but is this signifying the end of the Jet character? How do you see that?
So Bad Days is actually a small expert from a bigger piece called Blue Altar that I had, which was a really detailed, I think probably one of my longest pieces I've done. I have not minted it yet, just because I'm waiting for the right time to mint it. But it was essentially kind of like after the climax of Jet's story, where I kind of wanted to break away from like the traditional like hero's journey, like storytelling, where like he has his challenge and then he has this like climax, whatever, and then all that good stuff. So it would be Bad Days and Blue Altar was kind of the end of that journey, where you don't know if this in fact was actually a good story in the end or a bad one. All you know is this person is here, and you don't know if he's dead or he's hurt or anything. So I think that the unknown is a very cool topic sometimes, and I try to humanize that like the best way I could with Bad Days.
It's my favorite answer, even though it's the most frustrating one. It's you leave the cliffhanger in place, and I think this artwork does a great job of that, because that's the question that I want to ask, and I'm even more satisfied when you leave me hanging.
Yeah, exactly. You can't give everything out in the first try.
Amazing, man. Well, for those who haven't followed Laith's journey, I want to ask a question about two more artworks before we get to what I view as the absolute breakout moment of Laith. So we're going to leave the cliffhanger for the breakout moment, but I do want to I want to pivot over to Rarible, and I want to talk about two pieces that came out side by side, and they are the Cycle and the Fall. Can you talk about those two?
That was, I think, my first time exploring Rarible, if I'm not mistaken. It's the one with the steps. So it was so long ago, and then the guy falling, and then you also, it's the same person looking at it from the front, and then it kind of is just, it's just as the name suggests, just a cycle of being a creative. Like no matter how far you climb, you're never really there. There's always something to learn, and like regardless of how good you get, you're always going to doubt yourself. So that's pretty much the simplest way I can describe it.
Yeah, they're very interesting. Like you could see that it's Laith, but they definitely take a different path, which I appreciate. So just at least wanted to get some people's eyes over there, and actually, you know, for people to understand where you have artworks, because why what I'm terming next, in my opinion, to be your breakout. It was a really satisfying moment for for me personally, just watching your journey. It was a really satisfying moment because I had the pleasure and the opportunity to work with you for quite some time at this point, through Artifex, which we can touch on later. But to that point, I've always viewed you as humble, right? You're an extremely humble person and an extremely humble artist, and yet so wildly talented. And then here you come with experiences, and that's where I'm getting to. That's the cliffhanger. And you released this experiences collection, 50 pieces on OpenSea, and bam. And I remember, I think it was the first post about experiences, or at least a very early post on socials about experiences, where you had rotated among some, and it went pseudo viral on socials. And I think people were like, holy shit, like what is this? Who is Laith? What are experiences? When release? When mints? You know, like you started to see all these questions percolate the NFT space. So that really made me smile. Can you talk about just experiences and the journey to releasing them?
Yeah, so actually, like the one-of-one releasing for Spotlights, that was kind of the birth of experiences. I think when I posted that, I wanted to create a new style that was a bit different from what I'm used to making. I was pretty bored with what I was making, to be honest. So I wanted something that was a bit unique, a bit based on free-flowing kind of ideas. And then that's when you kind of have this collection that's based on these like figurines that are generated using curves and waves. It's very free-flowing, and you can mix and match whatever you want with them. And I think that was very cool. So from there, I was like, okay, like that I'm onto something here, where like the point of the original piece was to display that all these layers kind of add on to create a whole, which is who we are. You know, like no human being is an empty slate per se. Everyone has a lot of stories you can learn from, or experiences that usually, you know, shape who they are. And I think after I saw the first initial reaction to it, it was pretty humbling, because I'm like, wow, like I've never had that kind of blow up on socials per se. So I was always the person who would just, you know, post it and then move on type of deal. So I think when there's attention in that, there's definitely like a bit more of a kick to start to dive deep into that collection and start to evolve it. And, you know, I learned a lot through that process too. That even made my art work better now, just because it was such a different style from what I'm used to. So that's why it was very important to me.
You know, a different style from what you're used to. However, to frame it around some words that I used early, I mean, the first word that I led with was lighting, right? Early in the interview. And then later I added on color and texture. And to me, experiences are, you know, a lot of lighting, color, and texture in your face, you know, definitely positioned like an avatar. But in this case, I've always appreciated, and we could probably shout out some other artists here. We can shout out Lorona and her boys collection. We can shout out Baca and his collection. But I've always appreciated the small batch solo artist take on a cohesive avatar series that has that deeper layer of meaning. And in this case, it jumped off then, and it jumps off now. It just jumps off the page as something that both encapsulates you, but has that deeper layer again, just to hear you describe experiences and what it represents. And you could see some of these very small details that are baked into some of these experiences. So yeah, I remember when you had first sent it, I had the privilege of picking one. I think you had sent it out to a number of people at first. We had an opportunity to take, filter through. And I think at that point, geez, it was Cosmo was involved and had his eyes on. And obviously we know the stature of Cosmo as a collector. I think Kevin Rose, if I'm not mistaken, ended up getting an experience.
Yeah, so Cosmo onboarded him actually.
So I mean, how incredible, right? I mean, this is it really did captivate the collective NFT experience at the time. And again, was just a small batch of 50. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe plans to do a second chapter at some point.
Yeah. So I at first the idea that this collection is 100, so there's still a second wave that's going to come soon. But I didn't really want to rush it just because I think after 50, I didn't realize how much 100 unique ones is really. Because we're so used to this space having 8,000 editions for PFPs and all that stuff. So I think mentally, subconsciously, you get this weird feeling that you're not doing enough. But I try to always slow myself down when it came to creating experiences. I really wanted the second wave to be way more, I guess, explorative in the sense of shading. I did a lot of textures based upon even generative art and stuff that I made some algorithms to create some patterns for. So I spent some time actually the past, I don't know, it's been 6 months since I released the first wave. And thankfully I never really had any sort of financial need to push. So I was taking my time with it. The next wave is going to be very funky. A lot of the shading, even textures are very cool, and the colors are very, I guess, extreme in that sense, but everything is tied well in experiences, because I think that's honestly the best way to describe the past 2 years for pretty much 80% of the people with all the crazy COVID stuff. And now as we try to go back to normalcy, I think the past year and a bit has been pretty funky.
Yeah, I think this may be obvious to some, so apologies if you're one of those people. But it may not be obvious to some. The difference between this and a large batch collection. So we're used to obviously the 10K quantity being thrown around. Why I view this as so exceptional, and again, to shout out some of the other artists I mentioned as well, these are all handcrafted. You are handcrafting traits specifically to fit together in one artwork. So each of these is truly a one-of-one artwork, where you probably could have broken apart all of these traits and spun them up into quite a large generative collection. So again, there's no right path or wrong path. I've held a high bar of respect, let's put it that way, for these deliberately small batch, high effort, one-of-one collections.
I definitely had a lot of opportunities to turn this into a generated 8,000 whatever, but it just didn't fit what experiences really was about. And then I just felt with 8,000, I don't know, I just feel it's really rare to have something that's very cool looking, that's generated like that. So that's why I stuck with the 100, and it's been fun. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And again, it goes back to there are different paths for everybody, but to hear you stick to the importance of the message and the importance of why you created them. And I love seeing where it sits today, even that, one, you took your time with the first 50, but two, that you're really taking your time with the second 50 because you're going through your natural period of exploration. That's fun. It's fun to sit here, and it's something that I'm glad waiting for because of that.
Yeah, but I'm gonna have to do a lot of apologies to my collectors, but it's been so long.
It'll all be worth it when the time comes. But
exactly.
But let's pivot to. I would love for you to talk about Artifex a bit, and I want you to talk about it from your perspective, because again, what I want to make very clear is some of the things that I think Artifex does best is a lot about how an artist is presented, and a lot of the different assets that go into featuring that artist. And that's anything from videos to stills to trailers to, you name it, we've probably done it. And over the course of releases, we've really honed that process in. But a lot of that process is late. you've had your hands on a lot of these feature assets. And so I want to make sure, one, people understand that. And then two, I want to hear you talk about it from your perspective.
Yeah, I think like the first time I heard about Artifex was actually again back to Carlos, right? He mentioned that you needed I think a designer or someone that can wear different hats. That's when I reached out. And like timing worked out that the person you had in line kind of fell through, and our relationship started, I think, like a year and a bit ago. Then in the beginning, I think the entire planning of Artifacts was fun. We had a lot of like talks about, like creating the pipeline per se that we have now. And I think people who are used to Artifacts are used to seeing with our release dates. So for us, like Artifacts was a very fun kind of like trial and error, especially in a space that was so young at the time. So I think for us, it was like, okay, how do we present these artists in a good light that doesn't exactly scream like just buy our stuff, like buy. So for me, my main source of direction when it came to these assets and videos was follow similar to what car ads do, which is present the product in a very good way without trying to sell it. And I think that's worked out really well for us because one, the talent pool we have at Artifacts is so crazy. So some of the artists, like their sculptures or their one-of-ones look so great that when you kind of start to be free with creating these assets, I don't know how to say, like you're always bound to make something that looks good. So for me, it wasn't necessarily I have to make something that looks good. It was more about how can I make this look better in the sense of how can I present it better and show these artists the respect that they deserve for spending so much time on their art, and especially Dirk for creating these crazy 3D, like renderings of the, let's say, a one-of-one that happens to be 2D per se. So it's more about paying homage to these artists when we were creating the trailers, especially, is how can we present them so the artist themselves feels very happy about the product.
Yeah, I appreciate you honing in on that lens. I think it's been a really fun lens to look at things through. And you led with the name. I was going to prompt you on the Dirk at Work front, but you two have had a chance to work together with pieces of that pipeline. How's that experience been?
Dirk is great. I think Dirk is a very, very smart person. And you said I was humble. I think if there's a person that out humbles me, it's Dirk. I think I learned a lot about his process as well. Just even the different like files he uses, I never even knew existed really sometimes, or like how powerful they are. So I think just seeing his process and how he works, like you really get to appreciate what he does. Because like turning a 2D image into 3D that is also very applicable online and doesn't take up a lot of space, that takes a lot of work. So that was it was a very cool part of working with Artifex, actually, is having contact with Dirk, because you get to see a side that you rarely don't see on with NFTs.
That's interesting. And take that a step further, because Laith, when it comes to Artifex, I mean, you were there from the very, very beginning. Mm-hmm. And something that didn't exist at the very, very beginning is our conceptualization of taking the 3D over to Unreal 5. Yeah. And that really was introduced just after Artifex debuted, was when the seed of that was coming to life, and then has now become what it is today. From your perspective of your art, of 3Ds, of seeing that pipeline unfold, how is the inclusion of that felt?
I think it's great. I think it's definitely the next step in just making not only art more accessible, but just more fun. I think once you have the ability to just do whatever you want with these 3D sculptures, like some of the tribute images that Dirk has made, and even me recently, you get to realize how like fun it is to even just mess around with these sculptures. Because like you can only do so much with a 2D image, but once you have a 3D sculpture, you can kind of just place it however you want. And then once you take it further and create these custom galleries in Unreal Engine, now you're able to build out this entire experience surrounding the art. And then I think it's a very unique aspect to it. So like for me, I think even while I'm not directly involved with the Unreal side, because that's all Chewy and Justin's magic, I think it's very fun whenever we get a new release going to dive in and just seeing all the Easter eggs too. I think that adds, like you said, when we take it back a bit, we're talking about like the like zoomability of artworks. I think that's the next step, but it's the 3D in a sense where it's a lot of Easter eggs hidden around. And if you spend the time to just dive deep, these amazing worlds that, you know, Dirk, Chewy, and Justin built, you get to experience a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, man. And speaking of full circle moments, you know, looping in the Artifex conversation, obviously going back to the very, very roots of it with Carlos and pushing forth from there, working our way to the present day, and then really connecting those dots, again, being able today to do the origin stories, but also to do something else really important to touch on and tying that into experiences. You briefly did mention this earlier, but I just want to pull it out so you can talk specifically about the piece. With Artifex spotlights, right? Also something that didn't exist at the beginning or even middle of Artifex, and something that was a recent natural evolution of this idea of doing spotlights, and ideally that's curated by artists, but it begins internally. And it begins with you, and to mention Justin Wetch and JRAM as well, 3 individuals who have been incredibly important to Artifex. But now we get to complete sort of phase 2 of your spotlight. So phase 1 is a small batch airdrop of an artwork that went to certain Artifex holders, some full set collectors, and a random raffle to some others. So that's super fun. But the second part of a spotlight is that you are then able to mint a 1 of 1. And, you know, I think an important thing to say is the idea there is that 100% goes directly to Laith, but that we can really sit here and talk about this and lift up Laith's artwork. And in this case, a very, very meaningful one. And to go back to something you mentioned earlier, you know, it's directly tied to your experiences, and in some ways was the first work in that series.
Yeah, so like that piece is going to be called "Grew Accustomed to More Fear," and it's actually all literally started because of a lyric from one of the Kendrick Lamar songs called "Fear," where he talks about you know, fear accumulating throughout the years, and you know, once you have a certain level of success that you haven't seen before, you know, like when is God going to take that away? I think that fear is especially real for people who might not come from privilege sides, because you know, you've been in this, I guess, in the trenches to say the least. So you kind of see the side of where you might not have that success and how that kind of impacts your quality of life too. So once you reach and hit that success, is that like, okay, that fear starts to kind of sneak up on you. I think that kind of started the whole idea of like, okay, how can I show that just because it's like I'm fearful of this does not mean it is stopping me, and it can be very useful. And then again, that goes back to when this style started, where okay, like this fear is, you know, it accumulates over this years, but it's not really a bad thing. It kind of tells you that, you know, like you can push yourself too much, but also like realize like how much you've actually accomplished so far. You know, don't take things for granted. I think that kind of what fear does to me is that it helps me understand not only my limits, but also like how far I can actually push it and when to push it. So for me, that's why that piece is so important. And especially that song too, because it definitely encapsulates how, you know, you start to feel at this age, in my opinion, at least for me, where you kind of start to have a bit more career success. And then, you know, you never know, one day you can wake up and that's all gone. That's a pretty scary thought.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story too. And I love words in conjunction with the visuals. And I think you could see some of that in the artwork itself. And, you know, to me, it looks like and I say this in a very positive way, it looks like a very proud artwork. You know, you do see in the Experiences series itself, which is 1 through 50 currently, you know, they're all eyes on, you know, it's all large face, neck, and the upper portion of the shoulders, but eyes on the viewer in avatar form. And in this piece, you know, sort of the origin of Experiences, there's a bit more of the torso. And so it feels like it's again like a chest swelling with pride almost.
Yeah, so actually, like you're like one of the only people who realize the difference in angles. But with Grew Accustomed with More Fear, I shot it from kind of the bottom up, looking up towards this person or this entity. And it's more kind of trying to generate this aspect that, like you said, it's this pride that comes from even the crest on the shirt, which if you look back at the Gilgamesh tablet, that's actually the same pattern that I've used there. So again, it's the lions and the eagle being kind of like pulling them, and that's a very important symbology and like Iraqi and Babylonian culture. So the pride is definitely there. And as growing up, I remember I would always slouch, and my mom would always smack me on my head and say, put your chest up, or like put your head up. So yeah, thank you actually for realizing that detail. It's very, very nice.
Of course. And I love the story. I love the story about your mom smacking you on the head.
Yeah.
And now you can show a very, very postured artwork.
Exactly. Like that's my mom's main thing as a kid. It's always walk with your head up high.
It's a great life lesson. And I'm very guilty of stages in my life walking with poor posture. So I try to be as cognizant as possible,
Exactly.
rolling my shoulders back and lifting chest up.
Sometimes you can't help it. It's just more comfortable.
Well, it's also a lot of time at computers and over textbooks and whatnot. That doesn't help matters at all.
Yeah, we're sitting a long time, so we definitely got to be more mindful of that. Yeah, actually, this whole piece is a PSA about posture.
Hey, I'm here for it. You know what? Your piece can be a PSA to posture. The other fun one are the artworks that are like PSAs on meditation or breathing. I think remember Rio had done one that he released on Super Rare, which was a literal moving light that encouraged a breathing in and breathing out cadence. Hey,
that was a good one.
It's the double benefit to art.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
But yeah, just to wrap that up, it's going to be really, really fun. It's really, really fun to walk this artwork forward. Again, the whole purpose of Spotlights is to lift it up, and for one of the most humble and most talented people. So it's sometimes feels like a juxtaposition. I think there's a lot of yelling and a lot of noise sometimes out there, and that was why experiences themselves when that exploded. When that exploded upon release, that's why that was so satisfying, because it felt like this knowledge of, yes, like Laith has always been a badass. He's too humble to say it. Here experiences go. And now again, coming full circle and, trying to shine our own lighting, right. To help shine some space lighting on this piece. It's really, really special, man.
Thank you. But yeah, honestly, like, I don't think experiences, regardless of how they looked, would have had the same success without, like individuals like yourself, like Keegan, even Allison, and some of my other friends like Dino. They shared it so many times that it got a lot of eyes, and I don't think it would have had the same success like without, like you folks like actually sharing it. Because again, like me, like, I don't really post on social media often where I'm like, yo, I'm doing this. I just kind of post and go. So I think just seeing the support, I guess, from my close circle, that was very motivational, and actually getting it to the finish line. And that's why you guys had first picks.
Amazing, man. And I love to kick it right back to you there, because I distinctly remember the first time you shared experiences, and it was, no exaggeration, a holy shit moment of like, this is special. Like, this is a thing. That was the immediate reaction there. And actually, with that in mind, I would love to ask you, even if you don't remember the number off the top of your head, and I don't know if you're looking at it or not, but highlight one experience, one out of these 50. I would love to hear you talk a bit about the colors chosen, or if there are ties to why you did what you did with it. Would love to hear it.
Yeah, so actually, like, my favorite one is going to be the next collection that I just finished up. But from the previous collection, I have two that I really like. Number 26, which is the blue one with the gold and the kind of the gold halo popping out of it in the back.
Yep.
And the second one was actually one that kind of went unsold. I still have it, just waiting for the right opportunity to do something with it. But it was Experience 18. That one is actually one of my favorite ones, but the original person who was whitelisted for it did not want it. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to keep this for a bit until the next wave. But for me, those two were probably my funnest and my favorite ones from that collection. So to speak on number 26, which is actually owned by Cosmo, that was truly just based upon like all the old school Renaissance, like religious paintings, and I wanted to implement my own version of that with experiences. And then that's why you get all these royal colors with the royal kind of like blue, and the gold, and it's not even like shiny gold or like in your face. It's very like washed out. To me, that was a very fun one to put, just because those colors are very like pleasant to look at. So that's why it's one of my favorites. And 18, I liked 18 a lot because it's kind of just reminded me a lot of Power Rangers. So yeah, it's as simple as that.
So Laith, this is a wild fact that you just presented that I had no idea. So you had one whitelister not fulfill their purchase, and that experience still exists. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I even have like I've had offers that are like 1/8 on it and all that, but I just kind of kept it just to see what I can do with it in the future. There's, you know, like I said before, there's really no rush when it comes to this collection for me. I'm just, you know, trying to do right by my work.
Good for you, man. I love that story. I hope, I mean, it does look like quite a striking experience. So I hope whatever you choose to do with it in the future ends up being a whole lot of fun. I thought for a hot minute, my experience is side by side with 26. I'm number 25. So, you know, I just missed your favorite selection.
You just missed it. Actually, yours is very fun too, because it's the only one with the planet. And I think that was like one of my favorite details, probably, because I have another one that's based on the Black Widow, but yours had the only one with the detail that's actually what do you call it, like recognizable per se.
That was one of my, I think I shared with you 3 or 4 that I was super torn between, torn among, but that ended up taking the cake. And I think the planet was probably a piece of that decision making. So
yeah, that planet is it's a fun map. I remember making that map. That was fun. It's a good detail.
Yeah. I mean, it's been incredible. There are a finite amount of things, like a very finite amount of things for me. And for one reason or another, a lot of times it is relationship based combined with great art, right? And obviously in this case, the relationship was there. We've had I've had the honor and the pleasure and the privilege of working with you for quite some time now. And then when the art hit like this, it's been really fun to reminisce about experiences today, because it's so firm in my mind, like those days, just talking about them and then seeing them unfold. But
yeah, the glory days.
The glory days. Well, there's some more glory days ahead, my friend. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
And how about we hit a lightning round before we get out of here?
Let's do it.
All right. You remember the rules?
Pardon?
Do you remember the rules of a lightning round?
You ask a question, and then I have to answer it, and we can skip if I don't answer it.
I'm just going to give you a prompt. I'm just gonna, basically, there are no rules. You can go on tangents if you want, but the base premise is I'm going to float a word, a phrase, a topic. It's meant to be hot takes. So first thing that comes to mind, you know, quick hitters, and we can keep this thing moving. But if you do get super inspired and you do want to go on a tangent, break the rules, hit timeout, and do exactly that.
All right, sounds good.
Cool.
Let's start it.
All right, Laith. Topic number 1, lightning round, Ethereum.
It's interesting. It's definitely interesting. I think it took a long time to actually understand what crypto was, but I think the first time I bought Ethereum was like 4 or 5 years ago in like the first year. And that was kind of like my start to this, but I never really like looked into crypto or even like think about like NFTs per se. That was never on my mind, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic right now.
The current, again, this is the prompt. You can go anywhere you want with this. The current phase of NFT art.
Saturated. There's something for everyone. It's probably my idea of it right now. Like, I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's just there, just like the art market in general. Yeah.
Next topic. Carlos Marcial. First thing that comes to mind.
One of the nicest people I've ever met. He has such an affinity for life. And I think once you actually have your personal conversations with him, it kind of rubs off on you. This person just loves life. And I think that's like my favorite part about Carlos. He's a life enjoyer.
Canada.
It's home. It's home for me. I like Canada. Canada's great.
Let's go platforms now. Foundation.
A good start.
Rarible.
Also a great start, actually.
OpenSea.
OpenSea is a coin flip. It's a coin toss. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to get.
Nice. And not a platform, but we'll throw Artifex in there.
Artifex, unique. I don't think there's a lot of stuff like Artifex out there.
Lighting.
It's like the essence of life.
Jet.
Fuel. No, I'm joking.
What is
Jet is like, yeah, that's the start of my detailed work per se.
the year 2022?
Transition period. At least for me, that's where I'm kind of at a not necessarily like crossroads in my career, but it's definitely when I'm able to do a lot of decisions because the talent, skill, and like you said, the networking is kind of cross the path. So that's when you can, start to transition to cooler stuff. So yeah, that's 22 for me.
The year 2023.
The next stage. It's I'm gonna be on my latter half of the 20s, so 23 is gonna be an interesting time.
Let's go to the word fear.
Fear. Oh. It's an everyday experience. At least for me as an anxious person. But it's a needed one.
And then we'll close with the word experience.
Again, to piggyback fear, it's this kind of like life, without experiences, life is pretty fucking boring if you don't mind my language there. But if you don't experience stuff in your life and you just kind of, don't do anything, and then, by the time you die, you really haven't really lived, in my opinion.
It's beautiful, man. It's beautiful. And I, close there with fear and experience, because I really feel like you lean in really, really well, in my opinion, to those topical matters, but always come out on the the proactive side of it. Tackle it head on, even if it's there, and keep trucking.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, those walls or the distances you put in between you and the job or the person you're following, it's just mental. And fear isn't entirely bad, in my opinion. It, again, like I said before, it teaches us our limits. And sometimes, you can say, screw you to those fears and push past those limits. Something good benchmark to have.
Yep. So Laith, as we wrap here, please tell people, where do you want to be found? Where can they find you? Where can they interact with you?
Yeah, if you like my art, you can definitely find it on Twitter or Instagram. And if you're interested in the NFT stuff, I have my own collections on OpenSea and Foundations, where I have some of my other artworks available right now. And yeah, that's where the Laith Safa artwork is accessible.
Incredible, man. Well, it's been a pleasure to do this. Again, it feels like a full circle moment. I don't think it'll be the last one.
No, sir.
And cannot wait to see your next artwork hit very, very soon, in just a few days.
Me too. I'm very excited for it. It's going to be the re-entry.
Appreciate you, Laith. We will talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me, Roger. Have a good one.